Welcome, everybody, to Behind the Deep State. I'm your host, Alex Newman, senior editor at The New American. Folks, we talked quite a bit about the role of the deep state in fueling the persecution of Christians around the world. And what we're seeing in Syria right now, what we're seeing in parts of Central Africa, and even into Southern Africa is very, very alarming. And so I wanted to focus today on that. And I couldn't think of a better person to discuss it than our guest today. His name is Reverend Peter Hammond. And he's far more interesting than any TV characters like James Bond. I mean, this is a guy who literally walks up to a war zone where there's active fighting and hands out Bibles to advance the gospel and advance the kingdom of Jesus Christ. He has had one of the most remarkable lives ever. He was born in Cape Town, was brought up in Bulawayo, in what was then Rhodesia, what is today Zimbabwe, and he founded a ministry. It's called Frontline Fellowship. He's the founder and chairman of the Africa Christian Action. He's the director of the Africa Christian Network and the chairman of the Reformation Society. So he stays very busy in addition to all his travels. He's written numerous books, Faith Under Fire in Sudan, Holocaust in Rwanda, The Killing Fields of Mozambique, The Great Commission Manual, the Biblical Worldview Manual. So as you can see, he's been doing this for a few decades. He's got 4 children. His wife passed away, but just an incredible story, and we'll let him talk a little bit about that. Peter, thank you very much for joining us today. I know you're very busy, and you recently returned from travels, I understand. Let's start with Syria. Right, we were reporting in the New American Magazine going clear back to 2012 that these rebels, these moderate rebels that our government, the Barack Obama administration, was supporting were actually jihadists, Al-Qaeda, anti-Christian fanatics who were going to, and eventually did, start targeting Christians for extermination. What are you hearing about what's happening in Syria, and what do we make of that? Who's really behind this?
It's absolutely hideous. We've seen the pictures. We've got reports. People are sending us from Syria videos showing piles of dead bodies, masses of people being beaten up and shot. And this is concentrated mainly in the northeast of the country on the that joins both Turkey on the north and Mediterranean Sea on the left, on the west side. And the Alawite tribe, which is primarily, they're Muslim, but they're considered too tolerant. They're considered heretics by the Sunni Muslims. And they were the main support base for the previous president, al-Bashir, and Bashir Assad. He fled the country at the end of last year after the country has been totally betrayed and overrun. Christians are being targeted. Most of the Christians are concentrated up in this northwestern section, and they are being slaughtered. We know of at least 1,000 people from the pictures and the reports have been killed, but others are talking about thousands. It's hard to think that they're going to stop now. This is after all the promises of inclusion, and the British government just gave £50 million for inclusion policies in this government. And I presume some of the people that are meant to be included are the ones that they're just including in the mass graves right now. The disgusting behavior. We're talking about these thugs coming up, and they call them the security forces, but of course they were the terrorists just a few months ago. But now they're the new government security forces. And the people they're killing, they call rebels, but they're the people who were the police and the civil servants just a few months ago. So again, everything's upside down, topsy-turvy. This is something that the Arab Spring was working towards since 2011. And we've gotten reports that USAID actually put $15 billion over a 10-year period into regime change in Syria. Now they've got what they were aiming at. They've got regime change. They got rid of the stable government that respected Christians and allowed freedom of religion for the Christians. In fact, many of the Christians we know in Syria had joined the army, the national army of Assad's regime, because they recognized there was nothing between them and being beheaded or hacked to pieces by some jihadist lunatics than Assad's government, which gave a lot of freedom to such an extent that after Egypt, Syria has the largest number of Christians in the Middle East. 6% of Syria's 25 million people are actually Christians. So Syria has had a long tradition of tolerance because it's a very diverse country. It's got mountains, it's got fertile plains, it's got deserts. But Syria has many different racial groups. They've got Kurds there, for example. There are different religious groups, the largest being the Muslim Sunnis, but Christians, significant amount. There's even Jews. There's a variety of different beliefs, even some heretical groups of Islam, they would say. Nevertheless, Assad's government tolerated religious minorities and ethnic minorities, which now are being targeted by this new bunch of thugs. And the people who are running the country now, the president's got actually a, what do we call it, an alias. So, but they call him at the moment primarily, they call him the prime minister, but he's not been elected. He's just an interim prime minister. And what we're dealing with, there are a bunch of mass murderers. President Ahmed al-Sharaa, he had a $10 million bounty on his head by the US government, which was lifted by the Biden administration at the end of last year. And this HRT, which is a derivative of Al-Qaeda, was on the terrorist list of America until the end of last year. And in December last year, the Biden administration removed HRT from the terrorist list. They just got millions, something like 50 million euro from Germany. German Foreign Affairs Minister gave them that. The British Foreign Affairs Minister just gave them 50 million pounds for inclusion. So, yes, these are the kind of people that the deep state has been funding these scum, and now they're in power. And surprise, surprise, the liberators are worse than the oppressor that they had to remove. We've seen this played out how many times? Like the Shah of Iran is bad. Let's betray him, overthrow him, and then bring in the Ayatollah Khomeini. Much better, right? And then Ian Smith was a bit totalitarian, a bit authoritarian. He is, of course, trying to protect our country, Rhodesia, against communist terrorist insurgents. And the US government made a deep high priority. Jimmy Carter, of course, Kissinger, they betrayed Rhodesia. We were never beaten by our enemies. We were betrayed by our friends. And you could see that the massacres, the disaster, the catastrophes that followed these regime changes, you sort of wonder when someone's going to learn. I was told by the freedom fighter of UNITA in Angola, Jonas Savimbi, it is better to be America's enemy than America's friend. If you're America's enemy, you will probably be bought. But if you're America's friend, you will certainly be sold. And you've heard the other saying that it's dangerous to be America's enemy, but it's fatal to be America's friend. And here you've got one of the most stable, prosperous, productive countries in the Middle East that's been destabilized by 14 outside governments. And by the way, inside Syria, the different terrorists fighting in what they call a civil war, 20,000 foreigners fighting there. You've got Saudi Arabians, you've got Americans, you've got people born in Britain, you've got people from Canada and Australia. It's like a who's who of the world coming in there, and they call this a civil war, but it's foreign jihadists who came in, funded by USAID, the CIA, and the State Department. And this ISIS, as you know, was really an American creation. And even Biden, when he was vice president, admitted, yes, we did start ISIS, but it was to overthrow Assad's government in Syria, so it's for good cause. Yes, they've gotten a little carried away. I'd say they chopped off the heads of 21 Egyptian Christians, and who knows how many other people they've burned alive, a whole lot of people they've drowned, they've done most creative forms of mass murder, including filming it while doing it. So these are real thugs. And I just find it tragic that yet again, another stable country betrayed, and the same fingerprints, the usual suspects. Here they've destroyed another stable country in the world. And I'm so sorry that Russia was distracted with Ukraine, because I think Russia would have done something more to intervene and help their country, as they did before. At one point, when Assad's government was about to fall in Syria, the Russians came in and turned the tide, and then they went back. And of course, the Ukraine conflict has distracted them since. But it would be so nice if Spetsnaz could get in and take these thugs who are right now killing unarmed, disarmed people who are completely vulnerable. I think they would be running and hiding in holes if they faced real soldiers.
Wow, amazing, Peter. And turning closer to your home in Africa, we have Open Doors reporting that jihadist groups have been massacring Christians there. Recently, 70 Christians beheaded outside of a Protestant church is what the reports are saying. You spent a lot of time in the Congo. You have spent a lot of time in the Congo. What is going on there for Americans who most likely have not even heard about these atrocities being carried out? Who's behind it? What's the objective? What's the context here?
Well, yes, I have been ministering in the Congo, and we've got a missionary there right now. And I just was at a ministers' conference where we had 60 delegates from the Congo at our ministers' conference in KwaZulu. So I've got some very up-to-date information. An Islamic jihadist terrorist group in the Congo is reputed to have beheaded these 70 Christians. And It's hideous, but it's not unusual. There have been thousands of Christians murdered in the Congo over the years, and there have been millions of people slaughtered in this ongoing crisis. And I don't know if you'd be surprised to hear that I would say the problems began with President Eisenhower. President Eisenhower's administration bullied the Europeans to get out of Africa, and they particularly bullied the Belgians. And the Belgians said, the Congo is not ready. If we withdraw now, Congo is going to descend into chaos. And the Eisenhower administration, State Department said, doesn't matter, you've still got to leave. They left, and would you know it, chaos erupted, and the whole country descended into absolute savagery, massacring of nuns and priests and missionaries, and tremendous chaos. And I'm sure you obviously know the book, The Fearful Master, and G. Edward Griffith produced that, and that explains what's been going on in Congo. The United Nations came in, and as you know, government is not reason, government is force. And like a fire, government makes a dangerous servant and a fearful master. George Washington said that, and he is referring to government in general. But the United Nations as a supernatural or supranational international government is even more fearful a master than a normal government. United Nations forces are not under the law of the country they work in, nor even the law of the country they came from. They represent the UN. And right now, there's the largest rape case since the Second World War before the ICJ in The Hague, and it's for 200 rape cases attributed to the United Nations peacekeepers in the Congo. And when I speak to the people in the Congo, they say, you know, the United Nations don't keep the peace, they don't protect us, they do absolutely nothing to protect us. They behave worse than the rebels, they behave worse than the national government. The United Nations forces are the problem, they're not the solution. You know, I really support the idea of get the US out of the UN, get the UN out of the US. The United Nations is unaccountable, they're unregenerate, they're ungodly, they're just and I think the UN has just got to go. I mean, what a terrible bunch. I've served as a missionary now for 44 years in Africa, and I've seen the UN in operation in Namibia, I've seen them in operation in Congo, I've seen them in Angola, and I've seen them up in Sudan and Rwanda. And I might say in no case did the UN make the situation better. They made the situation worse. They've got this uncanny ability to go into a bad situation and make it much, much, much worse. And the UN has caused chaos in the Congo from the beginning. You may recall that they had a communist, Patrice Lumumba, as the first prime minister of the Congo. And when he got assassinated, which is inevitable, Moise Tshombe, the prime minister of Katanga province, broke away. They seceded. And the United Nations violated their own charter, and they invaded Katanga, the stable, pro-Western, mineral-rich southern province of the Congo. And they bombed hospitals, they bombed schools, they bombed churches. This is all documented with photographs in the book, The Fearful Master, and absolutely beyond shocking, disgusting. I was in Rhodesia at the time, and you know, the heroes at that stage on the cinema screens were the man from U.N.C.L.E., you know, Russian and an American secret agent working under the UN to keep the world safe. Well, that was the fiction on the screen. But the kids in the desk next to me in our school in Rhodesia were saying, we just escaped from the Congo, and the UN are not the good guys. They're the ones who bombed our church, bombed our shopping center, bombed our hospital, our school, stole everything we had as we were trying to flee the country into northern Rhodesia. And, you know, these UN thugs, they were using a C-130 transport to take the refrigerators, stoves, and furniture that they'd looted from Belgian homes in the Congo and fly it back to Sweden, Pakistan, Morocco, wherever these characters came from. And I think the C-130s were provided by America, and they were literally looting the country, taking people's weapons, taking their rhino heads and kudu horns and the different hunting trophies, stealing just about everything. Just couldn't believe the thuggery of the United Nations. And they call them peacekeepers. But, for example, right now in the Congo, do you know the Congo is the biggest operation of the United Nations right now? The UN has more peacekeepers in the Congo than anywhere else in the world. In fact, I believe more than everywhere else in the world combined. Yet there's more violence in the Congo than anywhere else. It's a total failed state. So if the United Nations isn't able to improve the situation in the Congo, what are they doing there? And I think they cost hundreds of millions of dollars a year, if not billions, Who knows what they're costing? But the UN are despised by the people on the ground. I can tell you, every Congolese I know, every missionary I know in the Congo looks at the UN as the problem. About the only thing they bring to the Congo is venereal disease, honestly. As far as AIDS and syphilis goes, that's the main cultural contribution. But corruption is endemic under them. They're absolutely disastrous. If the viewers knew what the United Nations got up to, no one would want anything to do with them. I look forward to the day when the United States can pull out of the United Nations, because they are a sick, debauched, globalist bunch, and they just have no respect for life or property, and they're anti-Christian. My friends in Sudan said, it's not that the United Nations are against religion. They're just against Christianity. And I think that sums it up. That's what we're dealing with, an anti-Christian force. So the chaos in the Congo is directly, you can draw a straight line back to President Eisenhower's State Department, the bullying of the Belgians to withdraw precipitously. And since then, there's been sacrificing of human beings like missionaries, as they were doing in Stanleyville, what now is Kisangani. We have a missionary in Kisangani now, but when it was still called Stanleyville in 1964, the Simbas came and they captured hundreds of missionaries, thousands of white, and every day they were sacrificing them in front of an altar to Patrice Lumumba, who was the first prime minister. And, you know, the Soviets set up their own terrorist training school up in Moscow called the Patrice Lumumba University. And I know terrorists who were trained at the Patrice Lumumba University. So this is the kind of thuggery that's been going on, and this goes back a long way.
Yeah, it's terrible. Now, all over Africa, we have had an organization in the United States called USAID running around, handing out money, working with various groups. And it's starting to come out now that a lot of that funding was going to Islamist groups, jihadists, in some cases actual terrorist organizations that were persecuting Christians. You've been all over Africa. You continue to go all over Africa. I know you run into them, and there are people frequently, a lot of people say it's a front for the CIA. What have you observed with USAID over the decades in terms of what they're doing in Africa?
Well, again, I think the main cultural contribution is syphilis and HIV. These people are high into immorality, and they buy up the local people. They've got no shortage of money. They throw money around like it's water. And there's a lot of prostitution that they invest in. But the local people are debauched from it, and you can see they leave behind a lot of medical problems. What a sick bunch. But they are funding every kind of leftist debauchery. CRT and LGBTQ plus perversion in Uganda and so on. Under Obama, I recall back in 2013 that the USAID put $11 million into training homosexual activists for the 54 countries in Africa. And when we've had race riots in South Africa, the USAID has been funding it. They're funding groups like the Everything for Free Party. I think they're called the Economic Freedom Fighters.
EFF, yes.
we call the EFF the Everything for Free Party. They've been funding these thugs, these Black Land First people out in Hermanus, race riots. The Roads Must Fall, where they started to topple statues of the founder of University of Cape Town and burning, destroying beautiful oil on canvas, original artworks. So USAID has been investing in destabilizing Africa. And yes, Muslim jihadist terrorist groups get funding too. It's not just the Taliban getting irrigation systems for their opium in Afghanistan. They've been helping Boko Haram in Nigeria, who've been burning churches and kidnapping schoolgirls and murdering people. Do you know, just in a 5-year period from 2010 to 2015, Boko Haram attacked 1,000 churches in northern Nigeria. They killed 17,000 Christians in just a 5-year period, and they got funds from the USAID. I don't think there's any evil on the continent, if not the planet, that USAID hasn't contributed to. It looks, you know, whether it's diversity concert this, or whether it's transsexual that, or some kind of castration, mastectomies, mutilation of kids. These people are involved in funding everything base. I'm so grateful that Elon Musk's exposed all of this and that President Trump is closing these people down, because they have caused chaos. I know that they had a key role in funding destabilization of Rhodesia, my home country that I grew up in, destabilizing South Africa, helping the terrorist groups that were attacking Southwest Africa. They have undermined so many stable governments in Africa. And we continue to experience the end results. For example, in Cape Town, about 2 weeks ago, they had a gay pride march, which I know although USAID is closed down now, they funded it. They funded it all these years, and it's done on a citywide level. There's no real support for this within Cape Town. This is imported funds. I expect things to improve soon because all these leftist causes are going to find themselves without sponsorship. Without looting the US taxpayer, I don't think they've got enough support on the ground to fund a lot of their marches, protest actions, cultural desecration, destroying of monuments and so on. It seems that USAID are doing what the old KGB used to do, which is active measures, revolutions, destabilizing countries. I've heard that USAID helped fund 8 toppling of governments. Well, I'm sure that would include Syria, that would include Tunisia, that would include Egypt, the whole Arab Spring. They've obviously gone a lot into toppling governments, stable governments, and then replacing them with the most unstable thugs. I don't know whose cause this serves, but maybe the globalists like a lot of destabilized countries, because most people would want to stay in their home, stay where their parents and grandparents lived, and they wouldn't want to be fleeing to America. But I think destabilizing these countries helps create a massive tidal wave of a human tsunami of refugees fleeing into Europe. Maybe that'll turn Europe into Arabia. They maybe had in mind to turn America into Ameristan. So I'm not sure what their full goals are, but obviously it's in the globalist outlook, and they hate nationalism, they hate Christianity, they hate the stability we've had. I was brought up in a paradise in Rhodesia. I never thought that I'd even travel to America. I mean, I'd no more thought of traveling to America or Europe than I would have thought of going to the moon. And, we were stable. We were living in a ideal environment. But the destabilization of these countries, it's created, I think, what the globalists want. They want some kind of big mix. They don't like countries that were self-sufficient in food, exporting food like Rhodesia was. So much better when all 5,000 commercial farms owned by whites could be confiscated, and the country could be a basket case, and the people could be starving, and they can have such inflation. I've got $100 trillion note from Zimbabwe, and it can't buy a half a loaf of bread. So, maybe this kind of out of control inflation suits their purposes. But if people want to see what the New World Order looks like, they just have to look at the failed states in Africa where, like the Congo, the government cannot provide you with usable roads. They can't provide electricity or plumbing. You've got to bring your own generator, bring your own infrastructure, bring your own water purification system. The government provides nothing, certainly not protection. And they're total failed states. And yet there's only one thing that works in these countries: taxation and bribes. You can't go 5 kilometers without going through 5 roadblocks. And each one has some bribe-hungry policeman or soldier or other official. They maybe not even have uniforms. And they're trying to get money out of you, but what do they do for the citizens? They do nothing for the visitors to the country except harass them. And this is all over Africa. And you've got to think this has got to be deliberate, because as Jonas Savimbi once said very wisely, he said, if you make a mistake, we're all human. Everyone makes a mistake. You make the same mistake twice, you're stupid. You make the same mistake 3, 4, 15 times, you have a hidden agenda. I think you've got to say that about the deep state and the governments, and not just the Biden administration, the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, but Jimmy Carter, who's got to have been one of the worst meddlers ever. And I'm amazed at how he's suddenly evolving into some kind of saint. Does America have a pantheon of gods that when a president dies, he suddenly becomes deified? It's bizarre. How can people be praising Jimmy Carter? He betrayed 13 countries into communism, plus Iran being betrayed into the hands of the Ayatollahs, and we haven't seen the end of that one yet. So I'm quite horrified at how American people, who are doubtless mostly decent people, have had their taxes stolen and misappropriated to fund anti-Christian, anti-American, hideous activities, perversions all over the world. And the sooner that ends, the better. But I would say closing down USAID is a good move. But how about closing down the United Nations while you're about it?
Yeah, and we do have a bill now in both houses of Congress to get that done. It's called the Defund Act, introduced in the Senate by Senator Mike Lee and introduced in the House by Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. Peter, we're down to just 3 minutes left. There's so much more I wanted to ask you about. We're going to have to get you back on to talk about what's going on with South Africa. Of course, you are there, and big executive orders from Trump calling out the ANC. Incredible things happening. But I do want to spend our last few minutes here today talking about what people ought to be doing. Peter, what do you think would be wise for Americans to do, considering the things that we've just talked about, the out-of-control U.S. government deliberately fueling the persecution of Christians from Syria to Africa to everywhere?
Well, I certainly reject globalism. They are our biggest enemy. And centralization is unhealthy. Decentralization is better. The most efficient states are the most decentralized states. I'm thinking now Switzerland. And the worst states are the most centralized states. I think Red China, just for example. And most states today are too centralized. We need more decentralization. In fact, I'm part of a movement for Cape independence. We're trying to get the province of the Western Cape to break away as a new country, as the Cape of Good Hope. We see decentralization as the only hope. And I would also say government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. So less government, more personal responsibility for sure. And I also think that the new policy of America of get out of the wars is much better. I don't think the solution is to send in the Marines. I believe the best thing you can do is send in the missionaries. We must evangelize our enemies. I believe more missionaries will do more good to stabilize the situation than sending in military adventurism. So, bring the troops back, stop having drone attacks and bombing and cruise missiles going into other countries. That does not help anyone. I'm convinced that's what helped destabilize Syria. I was quite horrified to travel around America and find some people saying, don't you agree we should bomb Syria? Now, this is back in the Obama days. And these were conservative, patriotic American Christians saying to me, don't you agree we should bomb Syria? And it's like, no. Can you find Syria on the map? But that's what Obama is saying. Why would you think that what he's suggesting is a good idea? Why would you get on board with this leftist agenda? Now, our mission has been evangelizing communist terrorists, Muslim jihadists. We've gone into countries like communist Mozambique and communist Angola and worked to undermine them from within. They coming to us with hate, we must go to them with Christian love. They coming to us with bombs and landmines and limpet mines, rocket launchers, we can go to them with Bibles. We can undermine and destabilize the communist regimes in the country by winning our enemies to Christ. Just think of how David was a hero. He was a conqueror. David killed Goliath. That's a great achievement. But Jesus is more than a conqueror. He turned Saul, the persecutor of the church, into Paul, the apostle, the missionary, the evangelist of the church. And I've won communist, terrorist, jihadists to Christ, and I believe missionaries will do far more good and not antagonize people. If Americans could get behind supporting missionaries into the Middle East and into the Congo, they will achieve more stability in the long term. Do you know, the least amount of missionaries in the world are in a 1040 window. That's between the 10th and 40th degree latitude, Northern Hemisphere. North Africa, the Middle East, South Central Asia. That's where you get the least missionaries in the world. And that's where most of the people are. And that's where we've got the least amount of missionaries and Christians. You've got the most violence, terrorism, highest human suffering index, lowest freedom index. So evidently, where the church has been doing the least work, you've got the most problems. Yeah. So I think that is part of the solution, evangelism and intercession.
Yeah, and you've been doing that heroically, I think, for a long time, Peter. People can find you at frontlinemissionsa.org, frontlinemissionsa.org. Peter Hammond, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your insights. I hope we can talk to you again very soon.
Thank you, and may God bless and protect America.
Hey, thank you so much, Peter. All right, folks, that's all we have time for today. I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State. Check us out at thenewamerican.com. Until next time, God bless you all.
If Americans want to remain a free and sovereign nation, more people need to understand the principles and values that built this great nation. At the John Birch Society, we have the organization, the plan, and the resources to do just that. Our founder, Robert Welch, said, "Education is our total strategy and truth our only weapon." Go to jbs.org to learn more, including how you can get involved to work locally and impact nationally. Join the John Birch Society today.